So Jenny, if you want to go ahead and take over sharing.
Okay. All right, so welcome everybody and thank you for coming. My name is Jenny Kishiyama and tonight I'm talking about Got Weeds, a practical approach to managing without chemicals. And so I hope I don't disappoint you by saying these are code words for pulling everything by hand. This is not 1-800-GOT-JUNK where you snap your fingers and they all magically disappear. So we go on to next was, why do you pull weeds versus spray? Well, my main reasons were for the pollinators and the environment. You know, things that we put on our grasses and our plants often wash away into the groundwater and it gets to our bay. And then the residue that's on things that you spray can get onto us and our pets. And least of all, it saves a little money, but you know, that is a factor. And the barriers, of course, are time, the scope of the problem, you know, how overwhelmed are you with weeds in your yard? And then what is your level of enthusiasm? Like, whoopee, we'll go pull weeds today. So today, here's an outline of what I'm going to cover: setting strategies, giving a really brief look at weeds, the kinds of tools that I rely on, tricks of the trade, and how to work your yard. I mean, this is my strategy of advancing my weed pulling efficiency. So setting goals and expectations and strategies. So I think the road to happiness is having your goals and your expectations kind of coincide. So to set some realistic goals is what you'd like to do. If you want that perfect lawn, you're going to have to work a lot harder. The thing that I came up with was to define my weed zones. Like, I would treat my lawn differently than I do my landscape or my garden. And so I also use different strategies for each of those by the time I have available, by the season, and of course, what I just mentioned, my zone. So, you know, there are a ton of weeds out there. Virginia Tech has seen 747 weeds that they list on their weed ID directory. But the good news is you don't have to name them in order to pull them, but it does help because you'll understand their biology, you know, how they grow, how they spread. And then, of course, you really want to know what type of poisonous plants can show up in your yard. So this slide is going through the types of weeds you'll encounter. And of course, the grassy and broadleaf are very descriptive. They're more grassy or they have leaves. And then, of course, they're summer or annuals, and that means their life cycle is completed in 1 year and they only propagate through seeds. And then the perennials, which will propagate either by seeds or some type of fleshy underground structure that stores energy over the winter and allows them to reemerge in the springtime. So you do have weeds all around. And one of my purposes here is to show you the lists of weeds that you typically find in any one of these situations. But the ones with the asterisks are ones I think are extremely easy to pull. So those are easy targets if you're limited for time and you're pulling. Knowing the life cycle of those particular weeds is extremely helpful because they're year-round. And when they emerge, you'll know when to look for them, and also when they'll set their seeds. And that is the most critical part in controlling your weeds, because once those seeds propagate or spread out, then you're in for years of hurt. Seeds can be viable in the ground for many years, over 3 at the least. And then every time you disturb the soil, they have a chance to germinate. So the main point is to remove all those weeds before they flower or set seed heads in the case of grassy seeds. and that will limit the number of seeds that you have coming in the next year. So here are two examples of easy to pull weeds: the hairy bittercress, which is a winter annual, and Japanese stiltgrass, which is a summer annual and highly invasive. Both of these are highly invasive because they are prolific seed producers. If you see the hairy bittercress, this one plant is probably going to explode with thousands of seeds. Every one of these little pods here is capable of producing 10 to 20 seeds. And then when you brush by, it is like a spring-loaded trap, and it flings the seeds all over your yard. So those are the ones to pull. Here are some common poisonous plants that will crop up in suburban yards in Virginia because birds will eat the berries and they will poop out the seeds. The Socrates Project is a great reference because it covers the list of poisonous plants below it. And so it's worthwhile looking through and seeing how they're poisonous and, you know, what to do. Most are poisonous. Most have poisonous berries, and several have chemicals that are highly irritating to your skin. So those are good to know, but also it's interesting because they produce berries. So they are also a high wildlife value, and things like the Virginia creeper are actually of architectural value because they do climb up walls without damaging the stonework because of the root structure. So there's value in these plants. You just don't want them where you don't want them, like around your pets or your children. So if there are a problem, if they're out in the back in an area that you're not going to worry about, then you can not worry about, unless of course, you know, they tend to be very aggressive. So now we're getting down to the why, or the hows. This is my working set if I'm going to be weeding for more than 20 minutes. I want to have a little chair because bending over or being on your knees is, you know, really physically taxing, and so you're really not likely to stay out longer than you can stand it. So I usually have that, and of course my hat and gloves, but my main tool is this thing called the hori hori, which is the orange handled digger. And it's fantastic because it's super sturdy and it can go straight down into the soil. It's got a little ruler that it shows that the blade is 6 inches long, has a serrated edge, it has a little hitch for clipping or snapping vines, and it has an orange handle on this one, which I like because if you drop it on the ground, you can find it. I used to drop an old one I had with a wooden handle. If I was working in the fall, it would go in the leaves and I would spend 5 minutes trying to retrieve it. And then of course, if you are weeding for a length of time, you're going to get more than a handful. So having 2 different buckets available for you to use is really handy. It's not that you have to drag them around with you all the time, but if you have things, if you're separating compostable things like leaves and twigs versus the weeds, which you want to dispose of, then you want to keep those separate. And then I always carry a little plastic bag kind of looped into one of the handles because you're always going to find shards of trash, wire, broken pots, this and that, and it's just really a nuisance to get up in the middle of doing everything and throwing something away or putting it where you think you'll find it later to pick it up and throw it away. So anyway, that is my essential working kit. And then my tricks of the trade, as I mentioned, seeds stay around for years. So if you're short on time, always try to find those weeds that are flowering and get those pulled. So I pull them while they're small And if it's hot out, like right now, I try to get it early in the morning. And if you can work the day after it rains or after you water your yard, they slip out of the ground much more easily. Again, pulling short on time, go for the tallest weeds in your yard if you're bothered by the sight of them, and go for the ones that are flowering. So take your hurry. I mean, I never weed without that little tool. And even if you're going for less than 20 minutes, carry a bucket around with you, because it's just very awkward to be walking around with a big wad of weeds in your hand. So getting to the root of the problem, you really do want to remove as much of the root material as possible. I see people pulling weeds by just grabbing the tops and yanking just green stuff off. Just that will only, allow the weed to grow back, because the roots are where the plants are growing from. So things like dandelion with a deep taproot, the hody is great for, you push the spike down next to the root and give it a leveraged twist, and you can hear the root snap, and you pull up. Then you can grab the base of that dandelion and pull it up. And for fibrous roots, sometimes they're spreading around and they're very difficult to pull up because they just really have a hold on the ground. They're interspersed with a lot of dirt. So this tool also pries that, you insert it right underneath the center of the plant and pop it up, and it usually works pretty well. So if you're just going after smaller roots, grab right at the base underneath all the green materials and find where the base connects at the root and just pull it straight up. Very easy. And for some of the weaker, slender weeds like chickweed, I usually take pull one end with my one hand, and then take my other hand to try and find the base of that root, base of the plant, because it all comes from a central point. So if you're just trying to pull one thread of that chickweed, they send out several runners, and so you'll never pull the entire thing unless you get right down through that center base of the root. For the thick roots, the hody is a must. And then after you pull your roots up, I always knock as much of the soil as I can from that root, the root ball, because you really are losing topsoil if you allow it to travel out with your trash. So my strategies for the different areas, like I mentioned, lawn. For lawns, my strategy is total annihilation. I really want to get to weeding small areas of lawn and get as much of that weed that I can. But in a preventative way, the key thing is following all of your lawn health practices, and the soil test being the basic one, because it tells you, your pH and what are the nutrients you need to add. But if you can't get to a soil test, you can still do a few things that will really help your lawn. Among those is core aeration and top dressing. And I was always skeptical about top dressing, but I tried it this year and I was blown away. At the top, you see a picture of my lawn in February. It's kind of peaked looking. It's got a lot of bare spots. And then I top dressed it in mid-May, and it just exploded. Got really thick, and the top dressing also adds this layer of organic matter right in among the roots or the top of the soil, and it felt like I was walking on a carpet. So it's a wonderful investment in time and energy. And then, of course, you can always convert some of that grass into landscaping, so you have less grass weeds to pull. Next is for your flower and your vegetable gardens. And here, open soil is an invitation to weeds. So mulching as much of the open soil as you can. Flower gardens, you're probably going to use the shredded hardwood mulch, or you can use hay or pine needles, especially pine needles if your plants are prone to liking more acidic conditions. You're going to want to water it properly to promote good growth, because a strong plant is going to outcompete the weeds. I mean, below there's a line on healthy plants for when you choose a plant to start with, but a healthy plant will definitely outcompete weeds for nutrients and the sunlight and the water. So managing your soil health with this mulching and proper watering, earthworms are going to come. You know, if you build it, they will come. So earthworms take organic materials from the surface of your soil and mix it with the soil underneath. So it's a great way to encourage plant growth, because those little tunnels that they make also make room for the roots in your plants. I'm not much of a vegetable gardener, so I had to look this one up, but there is a method that mulches with very deep layers of hay, up to 8 inches. A woman named Ruth Stout originated it, and she replenishes the hay throughout the growing season, but it really does help keep the weeds down and, of course, moisture in the soil. So she has found that very successful, and people are disciples of her method. And then, of course, you always like to visit your flower and your vegetable gardens. So pulling a handful of weeds each visit. This is my just-in-time kind of method. And if you feel it's getting out of hand, then, you know, take your chair and spend 20 minutes or a half an hour one Saturday afternoon and get those weeds out. Next is landscaping. And again, deny. You want to cover open surfaces with anything, and mulch is particularly effective. So here are a bunch of options for mulching your open areas. You want to have a thick layer, so up to 3 inches, because weeds, you'll notice if you just put a thin layer, weeds will probably pop right through that. One of the ways to make it more difficult is to do this layered method. So you start with newsprint, and it's best to use black and white newsprint, as little colored newsprint as possible, because you don't want the chemicals leaching into your soil. Covered by cardboard. Again, if you can get plain brown cardboard, you know, packing boxes. We're all getting lots of shipments these days from Amazon. So if you peel off all the shipping tape and break open the box, lay that over the cardboard, and top that with your 2 or 3 inches of shredded mulch, that will really keep the weeds at bay, because you've deprived them of sunlight. And then using other plants as ground covers. I mean, this is a beautiful example in my neighborhood. A woman has she has started to grow green and gold, which is a native Virginia wildflower. And you can see here it's spread and it's looking just beautiful. So, parting thoughts. As I said, this is not a quick fix, but remember why you're doing this. It's for the pollinators and the beneficial insects, and helping reduce the chemical impact on the environment. And I'm not totally anti-chemical treatments, because there are occasions that you really need to use something to help get things under control. So use something if you must, but get the right chemical and follow instructions. And remember to wear your safety gear too. Gloves, make sure you've got your arms covered, you've got protective shoes on, etc. And goggles if you're spraying. And so remember, a weed is just a plant growing where it's not wanted. And if you happen to find something, because oftentimes seeds will blow in. I've got a lot of hostas that I've just transplanted from a neighbor's plant that has wandered into my yard, or Rosa Sharon's, that same thing. So they're now along my border. So if you want to keep it, go ahead and transplant it. but if you don't, just pull it. And then after all of that, there are reasons to like weeds. They do protect the soil from erosion, and some of them really are good for adding nitrogen into the soil, and they harbor beneficial insects, and they feed them with their flowers like clover. And then they're food sources for many other animals. I happen to have a lot of rabbits that come through my yard, so I leave this large flowered leafed clover in my yard, and they'll preferentially go after that rather than my vegetables. So, and of course, some are edible by humans. I was just for a kick, I looked up purslane salads, and not that I would try it, but there are a lot of recipes out there. And finally, there's a wealth of resources online, and here's some of them I used. And I would say that you can go and do your own searches, but you should be careful to use sites ending in edu or .gov, because those will be your reference materials that are well researched and offer unbiased information. So those are worth looking, worth limiting your searches there. But if you're trying to identify something by their flower or whatever, Google is a great start. Get the name and then go to one of these other sites. So with that, thank you.